Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be going for the analysis of Prelims 2020 of UPSC Civil Services for paper 1. Now to break the monotony, I have divided the analysis into a number of small videos. So this is our first video, and in this video I will be giving you an overview about the entire paper and we'll be discussing questions from the polity section. So let's get started. Now coming to the overview, there were total of 100 questions. The level of difficulty was intermediate to hard, and it was more in the territory of hard, mostly because many questions were vague. And then there were many questions from agriculture, polity and environment as well. Some people were saying that this paper is for Indian Forest Services, not the civil services, but you really can't do anything about it. You have to be prepared for it. So if you look at the questions, and I will show you in polity as well, that the questions, they required conceptual clarity, which all of you or majority of you lack. Please, you have to accept your weaknesses, because everybody is running after one thing and one thing, that is current affairs. Now the current affairs and the magazines have spectacularly failed this time, and this will happen. This will keep happening because the current affairs fluke, the magazines, it worked 1 year, that was in 2015, but it won't happen every year. UPSC is not fool. They know the kind of study material that is available in the market. They don't want any institution or any shortcuts to prevail. So they will keep changing and they will keep evolving. You can't blame them, because they have to make the examination difficult or worth it. And because of the information explosion or the information overload that is there in the market, they have to come up with new and innovative ways of asking questions. Now, I will show you in history, when we'll talk about history and other subjects, that they are still asking from NCERTs. You guys ignore NCERTs like anything, and you are relying on old methods and old sources, like you're relying on Spectrum entirely for your history preparation, or I've seen some people reading Bipin Chandra for prelims. Now, it does not make sense. So I will tell you about the right books to study when we talk about history, right? So right now we're going about polity, then we'll come to different subjects in other videos, and I will be telling you the right sources to go about it, right? But please keep in mind, there are no shortcuts in life. You have to be consistent, you have to work hard, you have to do your diligent work, because if you keep running after these shortcuts, you won't make it. Even if you pass your prelims by fluke, you won't be able to clear the mains. That is what I'm telling you, because it needs a conceptual clarity. That is something lacking. So some questions were vague and some were purely factual questions. For example, from ancient history, there were some questions that were purely factual. Shortcuts and quick solutions failed again. No use of magazines, no use of quick notes. Now, in 2-3 days, you'll see every institute coming up with claims that we covered these many questions, this and that. But the truth is, if you give everything under the sun as study material to students, and then you pinpoint that these things were there from our notes, it doesn't really make sense. There are some institutions and there are some people who make really good notes and they put in effort, but those are just your shortcuts. You rely on shortcuts. It's not their mistake. It's your fault, because you are running after shortcuts and you are not going for the hard work that is required for any sort of success. Now, institutions, they are just market players. They are there for earning money. So they will give you whatever you demand. You are demanding shortcuts because you don't want to work hard. So don't blame them. And please do not blame UPSC, right? You have taken a decision to prepare for UPSC examination. It is not the duty of Government of India to provide you the job. It is not, let me reiterate that, it is not the duty of Government of India to provide you with employment. If you are capable enough, you will find your employment. And nobody went to your home and asked you to come to prepare for UPSC Civil Services examination. This is a decision that you have taken. For all its flaws, this is the system and you have to work through this system only. So please stop running after shortcuts and stop cribbing about things. Adapt and change yourself. That is the only way to evolve as a person, as a student, and that is the only way for success in life. Now, getting back to it. So cutoffs would be lower than the previous 2-3 years. That is for sure. I can say that with some form of surety, that cutoffs would be lower than the previous 2-3 years. Now let us look at subject-wise breakup. From polity, there were total number of 17 questions. Now, you might see from different sources that I am saying 17, someone might say 15, and for example, I am saying current affairs 3 questions, they might say 5 questions. They might be up and down of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but overall this is the pattern. One more thing, the answer keys that you get in the market, including the answers that I will be telling you, we all try to give you the answers to the best of our ability, but ultimately whatever the UPSC answer key is, that is the core truth regarding your examination, and that is something written in the stone. For example, if UPSC answer key were to say that sun rises in the west, then for your examination, sun rises in the west. It doesn't matter what is the right answer. So we all try to come up with our own solutions. I'm not saying someone is good, someone is bad. We are all trying hard to get you the right information, but ultimately it is the UPSC answer key that matters, right? So howsoever you calculate your score, just take it as a tentative score and keep an error margin of 10% up and down, because that can happen, right? Now from polity, the level of difficulty was easy to intermediate, and the questions were basically conceptual. Some were factual as well. I will show you now, and some minute facts and some minute details. It just made the examination of the questions bit difficult. But overall, I would say that the level of polity questions was easy to intermediate, and you required to have conceptual clarity. Now coming to current affairs, total number of questions 3, or you can count 5 if you take something from polity and economics and you fit it in current affairs, just to have some sense of satisfaction here that you did not waste your months and months reading magazines and ignoring newspapers altogether. So the total number of questions 3, level of difficulty intermediate, and they were purely factual. All the magazines and shortcuts, they have spectacularly failed. And let me reiterate again, spectacularly failed. You have to read your newspaper every day. And soon I will be making a video telling you how to read your newspaper, because Indian Express and Hindu, they are highly opinionated papers these days. Their editorials are the worst. They're trying to shape your opinion, mold your opinion as per their agenda. And they've been doing that for a very long time. So one day I'll have a very honest chat with you guys regarding how to go about the Hindu and Indian Express. From modern history, total number of questions 11. Level of difficulty was intermediate to hard. Relying on spectrum, not sufficient, because now see, this spectrum book has been around for a very long time. I entered this field in 2010, right? Even then it was the gold standard. Now it has got somewhat a fatigue factor, because new sources has come, and even UPSC has exhausted its question bank or sources from this book. So now some new additional sources are required, and when we discuss history, both modern, ancient and medieval, I will be telling you which books to refer. Then ancient history, total number of questions 10. The level of difficulty was intermediate to hard, and they were very factual questions. I mean, you really don't prepare for such kind of questions. I think the people who have history optional, they would be better suited to answer those questions, because they were very factual, asking about the names of officers from different dynasties and all of that. So that was factual. So I don't know, maybe to make the paper somewhat difficult, they have done it. But the beauty of such questions is that if you don't know the answer, there's a very big probability that 99% of the candidates do not know the answer. And remember, dear students, it is a relative competition. It is about percentile. It is not percentage, right? So you don't have to score 50%, 80%. You just have to score better than the rest. For example, in this case, about 33% or whatever the cutoff they come up with based on the overall results that they get. So don't lose heart. Yes, this was a difficult paper, but you always have a shot, because cutoffs vary year on year, and this time it definitely will be lower than previous years. Environment and ecology, total number of questions 15. Now environment and ecology is another region that people love to ignore, but this is very important, and it has become increasingly important since 2013. There have been many questions from this part. It varies, obviously it varies. Sometimes there will be 3, sometimes there will be 5, sometimes there will be 10, but this is an important part of your syllabus, more so because environment and ecology is closely intertwined with your current affairs as well. See, economics, environment and ecology, these are 2 subjects that are very closely linked with your current affairs. So you have to be good in these subjects, because you can say that those are current affair questions, but they are basically about environment and ecology or your economy part that we'll discuss later. So total number of questions 15 and level of difficulty intermediate to hard. Again, it required some form of conceptual clarity. And see the kind of questions. For example, there was a question about elephants, that about their herd and who leads the elephant herd and other things. So the point being, why elephant question? Because if you remember, there was a tragedy in Kerala where a female elephant, that poor creature, she ate something and then the tragedy, that thing happened. I really don't want to even talk about it. So that is why they asked about elephants and also specifically about female elephant. You see, that is how UPSC connects the dot, and you don't pay attention because you would be studying things like, now for example, for once I think in 2014 or 15 they asked about which river flows through which national park. That was just one question, and I see so many people wasting so much time over such questions. Why? You can leave that, but you should have a general awareness about things that are happening around you, right? So this was a question about elephants which was related to your general awareness, but again you fail to do that because you rely on sources like magazines and you basically want to be spoon fed, but this is not going to work out in the long run. Now coming to science and technology, the total number of questions were 12. Level of difficulty was intermediate and hard, and some of the questions were extremely vague. For example, there was a question about constellation of satellites and they're being in air in a triangular formulation. That was really weird and vague, but then again you can expect such things from UPSC. So they were largely based on your general awareness, which is a combination of your current affairs and your deep knowledge into issues. So please pay attention on your general awareness. Now, what you do in name of the current affairs or general awareness, you just learn by heart, but you don't understand what is happening and you have no inquisitiveness in you. I've seen so many people, this message me or they ask me questions. Such questions could be easily found on the Google search, but people are not ready to do the hard work and they're not ready to even lift a finger. But when it comes to movies and other things, you guys are ready to do all sorts of research. So that is the problem. The problem, my dear students, is with you. It is not with UPSC. Unfortunately, we are now living in a generation where the attention span is less and we don't want to work hard. In fact, it is being glorified that don't work hard. Everybody wants to be celebrity, but they don't want to work hard. Dear students, this is not going to work. It will not help you in the long run. So please work on your basics. You can never beat basics. You can never beat old school. Sorry for this typo error. Geography and mapping. Total number of questions 10. Level of difficulty easy to intermediate, and they were factual and conceptual. Now factual, when I say factual, basically these are about mapping, and conceptual, like there was a question about tropical cyclones. So they are basically testing your concepts and your understanding, right? And let me tell you, geography is very easy. I've seen so many people being afraid of geography. Geography is a very, very conceptual subject, provided that you take it as a concept and not as something to be learned through rote learning. Please stop doing the rote learning method or practicing it. It might have worked for you in school or college, but it really doesn't matter what your percentage or what method worked for you in school and college. UPSC is an altogether different ball game. Government schemes, total number of questions 2, or you can say 3 or 4, but just variable. But this is the range of questions from government schemes. And I've seen students reading booklets, hundreds of government schemes, and you just writing them down that UPSC asks government scheme 2, just 2. So you need to be again aware of the schemes that are in news rather than running blindly after the notes and just harming your own self. So please be smart, be very, very smart and strategic about your preparation. Level of difficulty intermediate to hard, and it was factual. Economics, total number of questions 17, level of difficulty intermediate to hard, based on concepts and current affairs. See, in economics you'll always get such questions only. There would be a mixture of concepts and current affairs. For example, inflation is a concept, but it is always in news, so they will combine the two, or current account deficit or any other thing. So there's always a combination between the two in economics. So economics, you need to have your basics very, very clear, and then you need to be conversant with current affairs as well. Then international organizations, total number of questions 3, time wasted 50 hours. Again, see, you have to be practical about your preparation. There are things that you can let go of. Why do you need to spend 50 hours or 100 hours writing down the international organizations and the government schemes? 5 to 10 questions you can easily avoid. You don't have to answer 100 out of 100. Nobody is able to answer 100 out of 100 in UPSC examination. You have to be strategic about your examination and how you attempt your exam and how you go about your preparation. So again, only 3 questions, and then you buy booklets and you read organization after organization after organization. Level of difficulty easy to intermediate and purely factual. Now let us start a discussion on the polity questions. So first question, a parliamentary system of government is one in which all political parties in the parliament are represented in the government. The government is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by it. I will tell you why this is the right option. The government is elected by the people and can be removed by them. The government is chosen by the parliament but cannot be removed by it before completion of a fixed term. Now first of all, in India, we have a parliamentary form of government. The other form of popular democracy is the presidential that they follow in America. And then there are hybrid systems like in France, but we don't really need to get into it. Simply what happens in a parliamentary government, like what we see in India, that people vote in elections, right, to send members to lower house, that is the Lok Sabha of the parliament, and whichever party gets the highest majority in the lower house, that party forms the government. And you need to get a 50% plus 1 majority to form a government. Then there are some other formulas like support from outside, support from within, coalition governments and whatnot. That is a discussion for some other time. So basically a parliamentary government is one in which there is a direct election to the lower house. In our case, it is the Lok Sabha. Then the party that wins, the party or the group of parties that has the highest majority in the lower house, it gets the right to form the government. Now, you might think the government is elected by the people. Yes, this is true, but it can be removed by them? No. It can only be removed by the parliament because as per Article 75 of our constitution, there is a principle of collective responsibility. And as per the collective responsibility, the government is responsible to the Lok Sabha only. Again, there is a vague wording here. It should have been more accurately, it should have been Lok Sabha. But then, okay, we can say that it is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by it through a no confidence motion. People cannot remove a government directly. They can pressurize their parliamentarians or the representatives for the government to get removed, right? All political parties in the parliament are represented in the government, not necessarily. Only those political parties who win the election, who get their candidates selected to the parliament would be represented. Then the government is chosen by the parliament but cannot be removed by it before completion of a fixed term. The government is not chosen by the parliament. It is formed from among the parliament by members who have the largest numbers, and that is governed by the President of India, right? Now under Article 80, President is also an integral part of the Parliament because it defines Parliament as a 3-body member, the President, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, right? So the government is chosen by the people, but it is constituted from out of the Parliament and it can be removed before the completion of a fixed term because usual term for Lok Sabha is 5 years, but it can be extended as well in case of an emergency. We'll see that when we discuss polity, and it can also be cut short if the government loses a no confidence motion or a confidence motion or the government resigns. There can be many options. So for this question, the most apt option as per our opinion is that the government is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by it. Now moving on to the next question. Which part of the Constitution of India declares the ideal of a welfare state? Now this is a straightforward question. The earlier one was a conceptual question. This is a straightforward question. The answer is Directive Principles of State Policy, because Directive Principles of State Policy, they cover all the things that, or I can say all the ingredients that go on to make an ideal welfare state. So this is about it. Nothing more to get into it. Then the next question. Consider the following statements. The Constitution of India defines its basic structure in terms of federalism, secularism, fundamental rights and democracy. The Constitution of India provides for judicial review to safeguard the citizens' liberties and to preserve the ideals on which the Constitution is based. Now this is right, absolutely right, right? Under Article 32 and 226, Article 32, Supreme Court of India can go for judicial review and issue some writs, and 226, the state high courts. But the problem is with statement 1, because it is not the Constitution of India that defines the basic structure, first of all, right? Secondly, there is no definition of a basic structure. And number 3, the basic structure doctrine was given by the Supreme Court in the famous Keshwanandan Bharti case of 1973, 24/4/1973, when for the first time the Supreme Court came up with the doctrine of basic structure, right? And this person, Mr. Keshwanandan Bharti, he recently died in just recent past, not way back, just recently he died. So probably that is why one of the reasons it is there in the paper, but it is also an evergreen topic, so there can be both ways. But it was never the Constitution of India which defines basic structure. As a matter of fact, basic structure has not been defined. Even the Supreme Court has refused to define what is basic structure. Through various judgments, it has enlarged the scope of basic structure, but it has never defined the basic structure. So the first statement is wrong. The first 2-3 words in itself prove that this statement is wrong. Then second is right, because there is a concept of judicial review under Article 32 and 226. So that is why 2 only. So this again is conceptual question, and students might err in terms of not paying attention to this word Constitution of India and defines. They might just jump the gun to basic structure and these things, right? So you have to be very, very careful when you read a question. Now the next question. One common agreement between Gandhiism and Marxism is that they both talk of class struggle. Again, this is basically a factual question, nothing conceptual. The concept part comes to how they perceive the class struggle and how it is to be carried on. Marxism talks about a violent revolution to overthrow the class struggle or overcome the class struggle, whereas Gandhiism talks about constructive nationalism and non-violence and other principles to get rid of the class struggle, right? So the common agreement between them is class struggle. Now it could also be a part of your basic philosophy, but we found it apt to cover this under polity. Some people might put it in history as well. It is up to their interpretation. So this is basically both polity and history. Doesn't really matter, but we have discussed this question here. Now the next question. In the context of India, which one of the following is the characteristic appropriate for bureaucracy? So there are options. An agency for widening the scope of parliamentary democracy. That is not the role of a bureaucrat or bureaucracy. That is the role of the political executive. An agency for strengthening structure of federalism. Again, that is not the role of bureaucracy. An agency for facilitating political stability and economic growth. Again, political stability is not the job of bureaucracy. It is the job of, first of all, we the people who elect or who should elect a stable government, then the intrigues that happen within the parliament or political parties. And again, economic growth is again a prerogative of the government in power and how they make their policies. The job of the bureaucracy is to implement the government programs and also give advice to the ministers or the government, but it is up to the government or minister to heed to the advice or not. That is up to their wish. But purely the work of bureaucracy is an agency for implementation of public policy. So again, a very, very simple question and a very conceptual question. And I don't think anybody who's aspiring to be a civil servant should err in this question, right? Now moving on to the next. The preamble of the Constitution is a part of the Constitution but has no legal effect. Now this question is somewhat confusing. There are very close two options and we have our interpretation, but at the end of the day, it really depends on what UPSC says in its answer key. So we are going to give our answer, but let us see what UPSC says. So it is a part of the Constitution. Yes, the Supreme Court clarified in a judgment, but it has no legal effect. That is also true, but wait. Not a part of the Constitution and has no legal effect either. So this is wrong. And this one is also wrong. Now read the last one. A part of the Constitution, but has no legal effect independently of other parts. Now this is important because the Supreme Court in its judgment said that independently you cannot go to enforce the preamble in the courts, but preamble has to be read with other provisions of the Constitution to analyze or to interpret the meaning of different articles or different provisions within the constitution. So if you apply that concept, then we think that this option is more apt than this one. So you might find either this or this in different answer keys. But like I said, at the end of the day, it is the UPSC whose answer key would matter. And what would be the answer key? That you would get to know after the results of prelims 2020 is out, and after a month or two, they will also release the answer key for that prelim. Now moving on to the next. With reference to the provisions contained in Part 4 of the Constitution of India, which one of the following statements are correct? Now Part 4 is DPSP. So this is the second question related to DPSP, right? They shall be enforceable by courts. No, DPSPs or the directive principles of state policy are not enforceable by courts. They shall not be enforceable by any court. Yes. The principles laid down in this part are to influence the making of laws by the state, right? Because even in the debates of the constituent assemblies, different members or the argument was made that this part 4 of the constitution is to act like a blueprint for the government to make its policies, and any government that does not follow this part 4, they do it at their own peril, because this part 4 lays down the basic foundation of a welfare state in India. And that was the promise on which the freedom fighters got support from the people of India, that after throwing out the British, we will be forming a welfare democratic state. So all the principles of a welfare democratic state are based in part 4 of the constitution. So these principles are to be followed by governments while making laws. So then again, option 2 and 3. Now the next, consider the following statements. According to the constitution, a person who is eligible to vote can be made a minister in a state for 6 months if he or she is not a member of legislature of the state. Now this again is a confusing statement. How? I will tell you. According to Representation of People Act, a person convicted of a criminal offence and sentenced to imprisonment for 5 years is permanently disqualified from contesting election even after his release from prison. Now we have marked neither 1 or 2, and I will tell you why. Now coming to the first point, Article 164 enables a person who is not a member of the legislature to be a minister in the government, provided that he is elected to the government within 6 months. Now the present Chief Minister of Maharashtra, when he was made the Chief Minister, he was not a member either of the State Legislative Assembly or the State Legislative Council. So later on, he was elected to the State Legislative Council, and there was some little controversy and legal entangle at that point of time. So probably that is why they have asked this question. Now see, if you read it on face, it might look okay to you, and some people would say that this is the right option. But why we think that this is wrong? Because they say a person who is eligible to vote. Now any person who is a registered voter in a state is to be 18 years and above. But to be a minister or a member of a state legislature, you have to be minimum 25 years of age, right? So that is the problem with this statement. Had it been an eligible voter above 25 years of age, then I would have, or we would have agreed with the statement. That is why there is an ambiguity. On the face of it, if you read it in a jiffy or a hurry, you won't find the ambiguity, but there lies the ambiguity, that it is just stating eligible to vote. The correct statement in our opinion should have been eligible to vote and above 25 years, because whosoever is appointed as a minister under Article 164, he is done so under the rules of the legislature. So one of the rules of the legislature, which is nothing but the copy of the rule of the parliament and Rajya Sabha. So to be a member of a state legislature, your minimum age should be 25 years. So that is why we have picked this answer to be wrong, but some might say that it is right. Again, this is open to interpretation, and again, it would be UPSC who would be deciding. Now coming to the second part, it is absolutely wrong, because Section 8 Clause 3 of Representation of People Act 1951 states that if any person is convicted in an offence for which the minimum punishment is 2 years, then that person stands disqualified, right, for a period of 6 years after he has completed his punishment. Now what does that mean? Let me simplify it for you. For example, somebody commits a crime today, and 2 years later he is convicted for that crime, and the maximum punishment for that crime was 8 years. So he served in prison for 8 years. Then after getting out of the prison in 8 years, he again has to wait for 6 years to fight an election. So this is not a permanent disqualification, but a disqualification from the date when the conviction starts to the date till 6 years after the conviction. So that is why this statement is also wrong. Again, this question is very, very conceptual, not at all factual, because you read this time and again, Representation of People Act, and as a matter of fact, this whole topic is a part of your syllabus for mains examination, but you also read for your prelims. And again, dear students, there is no dichotomy between mains and prelims. This is again a misconception that people think that first somehow we'll clear the prelim and then we'll think about the mains. No, it does not work that way. Please, 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 your studies have to be holistic. UPSC has been proving that time and again. So that is why both of these are wrong, because in our opinion here it should have been not just eligible to vote but above 25 years, and here I have explained, right? So let us move to the next. Consider the following. The president can summon a session of the parliament at such place as she thinks fit. Absolutely right, under Article 85. The Constitution of India provides for 3 sessions of the parliament in a year, but it is not mandatory to conduct all the 3 sessions. Now this is wrong, because it is a general parliamentary practice that has come to be that there are 3 sessions in a year. What the Constitution says is that the maximum gap between 2 consecutive sessions should be 6 months. That means if one session ends today, then within 6 months another session should start, but it does not put any ceiling on the maximum number of sessions that can be called, and it does not provide that there should be minimum of 3 sessions. So that is why this statement is wrong, and this is right, because the president can summon the session of parliament at such place as she thinks fit. Now this is a very simple question about Rajya Sabha, conceptual question. Rajya Sabha has equal powers with Lok Sabha in the matter of creating new All India services. As a matter of fact, here under Article 312, Rajya Sabha has the upper hand for creating a new All India services, because that proposal has to be initiated in the Rajya Sabha and then it will go to the Lok Sabha. So here Rajya Sabha is superior, or it has greater power than Lok Sabha. So this is wrong as per this question. Amending the constitution, right. Any proposal for amendment of the constitution can be placed either in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. So here they are equal. The removal of government, like I said, Article 75, principle of collective responsibility. The Union Council of Ministers is responsible to the Lok Sabha only. So the no confidence motion can also be introduced in the Lok Sabha only. The Rajya Sabha has no role to play there. Making cut motions. Now cut motions are part of the budgetary process, and again the entire budgetary process, the maximum or the major part goes on in the Lok Sabha. Here again the Rajya Sabha does not have any power. So, or to be more precise, the Rajya Sabha does not have power as equal as Lok Sabha, because even if they make any amendment, it is not pertinent on the Lok Sabha to accept that regarding cut motions, right? So for this, the correct answer is amending the constitution. Simple question based on concept. Now with reference to funds under Members of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme, which of the following statements are correct? Now MP Lads has been in news because MP Lads was suspended due to the austerity measures adopted by the union government, and there has been a controversy about this. About MP Lads, they were in news, that is why they have asked a question. Now this question is very, very specific, and it requires, I would call it vague, and I will tell you why. MP Lads fund must be used to create durable assets like physical infrastructure or health, education, etc. True. A specified portion of each MP's fund must benefit SC/ST population. Again true. I think 15% and 7.5% are earmarked for benefit of SC/ST community. MP Lads are sanctioned on a yearly basis, and the unused funds cannot be carried forward the next year. This is also right. Now this one is the vague part, because number one, this is a very minute detail of this scheme, and you don't really find it, or you don't generally find it everywhere. Even I had to do some research to get to this point. So that is why I'm saying that this is the vaguest part of this, right? The district authority must inspect at least 10%. The correct answer is 1%. So that is how they are playing with you. So at least 10% of all the works implemented every year. So if you are well conversant with your polity, I think you must have got all the 3, but this one would have confused you. and see how UPSC plays tricks on your mind. 1, 2, 3 you know are right. Again you'll be confused on the fourth option. But then there was a glimmer of hope here because it just said 1, 2 and 4. Had it been 1, 2, 3 and 4, you would have been destroyed. So even by method of elimination, you could answer this question that 1, 2 and 3 are right. Now moving on to the next. Which one of the following categories of fundamental rights incorporates protection against untouchability as a form of discrimination? Now, strictly, if we talk about it, Article 17 explicitly bans untouchability, the practice of untouchability in both thought and deeds, right? But Article 17 is not mentioned here. So which would be the closest? So please ignore this mistake. This is a mistake. The right answer is right to equality, because this is the closest to what we'll get, and right to equality is applicable to everybody. So as per this question, had Article 17 been mentioned, then between the two, you could have chosen Article 17. But right now, only Article 14 is given. That is why this one is right. Now let's move on to the next. In India, the separation of judiciary from the executive is enjoined by the Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 50. Now this is a simple, straightforward question. No need to apply any formulas or principles. And if you see, you don't need to remember articles from polity. Students are confused and they are obsessed with remembering articles, but you don't need to remember any article. You just need to understand the text of the article. So here, this is the major article of your constitution, Article 50, Directive Principles of State Policy. It comes under Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 36 to 51 in Part 4, which is DPSP. So Article 50 talks about the separation of judiciary from executive. So this is all about this question. Now, along with budget, the finance minister also places other documents before parliament, which include the macroeconomic framework statement. The aforesaid document is presented because this is mandated by. Now there was an act called FRMB Act. Now this is invoked and this is temporarily suspended time and again. This is basically to ensure a form of fiscal responsibility in the government. And under this act, the government has to give a macroeconomic framework statement, which is to be reviewed by the parliament. It is for a form of continuous review of the government expenditure. So other options are wrong. Long-standing parliamentary committee, no. Article 112, which talks about budget. And mind you, the word budget is not mentioned in our constitution. The word is annual financial statement, right? And Article 1110 deals with the issue of money bills, but it is not under that. Article 113, this is basically demand on grant appropriation bills. All of these are connected. So this is also not a part of that. It is the FRMB Act of 2003. A constitutional government by definition is a government by legislature. Now you might be confused in this question. Why? You see a constitutional government in India and there is a legislature, this could be an option. Popular government, yes, this could be optional. Multi-party government, yes. But the correct option is a limited government. Why? If you have read your polity well enough, and even if you have just read something about fundamental rights, you would have known that the role of fundamental rights is to put limitations on the government. And one of the fundamental functions of your constitution is to limit the powers of the government, to specify what it can do, and more importantly, specify what it cannot do and what it cannot impose on the citizens. Had that not been the case, you wouldn't have even felt the need for a constitution, because then it would have been a jungle raj. Anybody could impose anything. But the constitution, always constitutional, puts limits on the powers of government. That is why a constitutional government is quintessentially defined as a limited government. Now again, somewhat vague question. Other than the fundamental rights, which of the following parts of the Constitution of India reflect or reflects the principles and provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? First of all, never ever waste your time in remembering the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you read it, well and good. If you can retain some part, well and good. But do not waste your time over it. Now you have to use your general awareness to get around this question. Again, there might be some form of vagueness in the options that we are giving and what others would be giving. But like I said, ultimately it is the UPSC answer key that matters. So, preamble, directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights. So we have marked 1, 2, 3 because preamble talks about principles like liberty, equality, fraternity, etc. The directive principles of state policy also talk about a welfare state, and fundamental duties also talk about universal brotherhood and fraternity. So that is why we have included all the three. But then again, this is open to interpretation, and ultimately UPSC key would matter. Now this is a very technical question. In India, legal service authorities provide free legal services to which of the following types of citizens? Now this is basically a type of a question or type of a thing that you don't read in detail, but they have asked about nitty-gritties of National Legal Services Act. So it says a person with annual income of less than 1 lakh rupees. Now this is correct, but there is an ambiguity in the sense that for Supreme Court, this limit is 1.25 lakh annual income. So if you were to be too technical, then this would have been wrong, but among the given options and answers, this is right. Transgender with an annual income of less than 2 lakh rupees. So this NALSA Act does not mention transgenders exclusively, so not there. Member of OBC, again, it does not mention any other community, so not there. And all senior citizens, yes, because there was an amendment in 2016. So all senior citizens are necessarily covered under NALSA Act. So as per this question, again, there's an ambiguity in this one, but this one is correct. So that is why 1 and 4. So folks, thank you for watching. That is all for part 1. We'll be coming with other parts real time soon. So till then, keep watching our channel, keep subscribing, and also press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new video that we post. Also, if you liked our video, please press the like button. And do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. We post regularly there as well. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe. Have a great time. Namaste and Jai Hind.